Quick reminder before we get started, if you haven't subscribed or followed this podcast on your favorite podcast platform yet, I would really appreciate it if you click the follow button now or the subscribe button, as it will really help us a lot. In this episode of Recovery Snippets, I have a lovely chat with Hanne Arts, who struggled with anorexia back then, but now she's in a much better place, and she also has a great YouTube channel in which she documented her recovery journey. In this episode, I speak with what it was like for her to struggle with anorexia and how it all came to be. If you want to listen to the full episode, then check the link in the description of this podcast episode to just jump and hop onto the full episode.
Yes, that sort of expat life and moving around a lot had its perks, but it also had its downsides. It could be quite stressful, and a lot of the time I felt like I didn't have all that much control over my life. I was also bullied when I was younger, and there was basically a lot going on, which made me feel like there was just loads that wasn't within my control. And then I found that what I ate or didn't eat was in fact within my control. So I started messing around with that a little bit, started to eat less. This is also the time that I guess I was around 12, 13 years old when I started going through puberty, which was a stressful time. And reducing my food intake was a way for me to reduce that anxiety. It wasn't exactly something that popped up. It was gradually losing weight and making what I thought were healthier choices, cutting out some of the junk food or traditionally more unhealthy food. I thought this was a good thing until I found out that obviously I'd lost a lot of weight. My body wasn't healthy, quite the opposite. And at that point, I just felt stuck. I suppose I had always thought that controlling my food was a way to take control, but I actually found that I didn't have any control. I was being controlled by the eating disorder, and I didn't really, at that point, know what to do to get out. And I know I'm not alone in that. There's so many people who feel the same way and just feel stuck in this really dark place.
I just want to touch from that, because most people who have this impression that people who are struggling with anorexia, they feel like, they say to the people struggling with anorexia, like, oh, just eat more and everything. Oh, this person struggling with anorexia is just ignoring me. But from what you're saying, that even if you struggle with anorexia, you still have this mindset that you still want to recover. You want to recover, but what's that thing that's holding you back?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people with an eating disorder do want to recover, but they either don't know how to, or they're petrified of gaining weight or being unhealthy. And these are all sort of conscious factors holding them back. But there's also ingrained habits and routines and compulsions that become part of their everyday life. And at some point or other, especially if you've been struggling with an eating disorder for a long time, how do you really know what normal eating looks like? Even if you want to go back to it, it's really difficult to go back to it, because you don't want to eat too much because the eating disorder will be shouting at you. You don't want to eat too little, but you don't know what either of those things are. So it's just really tricky to do it right. Whereas with the losing weight and sticking to the disordered behaviors, it feels like you're doing that successfully. So a lot of the time it's just easier to stick with that, because recovery is going to come with, missteps and potential relapses and that sense of failure, because you will be failing the eating disorder. Whereas sticking to the eating disorder, it just feels safer.
Yeah. Did it ever cause any tension with relationships, like friends, families, any loved ones?
There wasn't that many friendship relationships to speak of, because I completely withdrew myself. But definitely with my family, especially around meal times, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of arguments, with them obviously trying to push me to eat more, telling me to eat more, and me trying to listen to that, but also get away with as little as possible. And they would obviously notice that, and it did cause a lot of conflict.
Yeah. And how did that make you feel? Like, were you kind of grateful that they were telling you to eat more, or were you just like, oh, I don't want to hear a single word and just like run to your bedroom or something? How did it make you feel?
Mm-hmm. At non-meal times, I could see that they were doing it for all the right reasons, that they were trying to support me in whichever way they felt they could. But at meal times, when that anxiety was already so high, and when I was struggling with so many things within myself, having that external pressure there as well, it just felt like they were pushing me to do the thing that I least wanted to do, and not necessarily to help me, but just because that's what they wanted me to do.
Yeah. It must have been really difficult during the time. And is it strange for you to like look back at like younger Hannah about all of this?
Yeah, definitely. I think my whole personality has changed so drastically since that time.
Oh, and from where you are at the moment, like if because back then meal times were like really anxiety inducing, and I'm sure there was like many little things in between. But how back then, if you could remember, how would you have wanted to be treated or um, supported by your family or your friends? What things would be helpful and what things would be very, very anxiety inducing that you just want to not talk to them or something?
Yeah. I think obviously for recovery from a restrictive eating disorder, and especially with that factor of underweight playing into the equation as well, it was really important for me to gain weight and to eat my meals and to normalize my eating behaviors. So having someone there at meal times to hold me accountable or just sit with me or eat with me, um, that was and would have been really helpful. Um, any additional comments or pushing me beyond what I sort of expected I would have to do at that meal time, or making changes during that meal time, that's all things that added a lot of unnecessary stress to the extent that maybe I would follow through in that meal, maybe I wouldn't, but my mood would be impacted so much that the rest of the day would be thrown off. So I guess really just that unconditional support, people being there, especially during meal times, but also after meals to keep me distracted,
Hmm.
just to show me that they were there for me, um,
Yeah.
without telling me, you have to do this, you have to do that. And otherwise, I'm not going to be there for you, or it will be an argument, or you will be blamed for that.
Oh yeah. No, that's not good. So that's really, yeah. So like, did you think Hannah back then, going back in time, would have because like support during meal times, having someone with you, do you think you would back then just be like, oh, I don't want that to happen? Like, did you did you think that would have been helpful back then with your mindset back then, or would you have been like, oh, no, I don't want anyone to be with me during meal times?
As I said, it seemed like meal times and between meal times, there was two different people there. I was completely different in each of those scenarios. So between meals, I would definitely have been able to understand that that would have been useful. And it is at those times that, you should plan these things in. You decide beforehand and between meals what you want and need at the meal times. And then during the meal times, it will suck no matter what. But you know that you have actually made that decision. Other people haven't imposed that on you. Um, you may still try to get around it, but if it's decided beforehand, it's set in stone, you're going through with it. And it does make it a lot easier, even if in the moment it's still tough.
Yeah, there's no with any change, it's never easy. But from where you are right now, it seems like it must have been really, really worth it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, to where you are now, would you think you're in a much, much better place in terms of your mindset around food, relationship around food?
Yeah, definitely. And it's something I hadn't expected necessarily when I first started recovery.
Really?
I always thought that full recovery maybe wasn't really possible. And when I gained weight and reached my pre-eating disorder weight and still had those same urges and the eating disorder was still very much there, I thought, okay, that's just what it's going to be for the rest of my life for me. But obviously, as you grow up, you're bound to gain more weight. Your body naturally changes. So it's only once I really allowed that to happen that I noticed that some of those thinking patterns, some of those behaviors started to hold less power over me until they were just gone from, obviously it was a very gradual process, but from one moment to the next, I sort of noticed that actually this hasn't been bothering me, and it hasn't been bothering me for some time. Occasional things would pop up and then even that would go, which was absolutely crazy to me.